The Attic revealed this 1912 World Championship Series scorecard between the New York Giants and Boston Red Sox. Look at the 1912 picture of the Boston Red Sox, champions of the American League, indicates a 23-year-old rookie by the name of Hugh Bedient. Pitchers listed on the scorecard is a Falconer boy, Bedient, right below the famed Smokey Joe Wood. This is 1912. Archives also indicate a reception and banquet program hosted for Mr. and Mrs. Hugh Bedient upon their return home from the World Series and baseball games, and where Mr. Bedient took part and pitched for the Boston Red Sox versus the New York Giants. A 4x6 postcard, which on the back states Hugh Bedient leaving Samuel's Opera House after homecoming celebration following his outdueling New York Giants Hall of Famer Christy Mathewson in the 1912 World Series. What was this all about? And let's learn more about Hugh Bedient. Who was this Hugh Bedient? What we know is he was born October 23, 1889 in Gary, New York. Shortly thereafter, he moved to Falconer. Hugh Bedient pitched his first high school baseball at Falconer in 1905. And it was in 1905, on April 25th, 1905, that he beat the Jamestown Business College 12-10 for his first victory. It was also during that year that Falconer High School registered its first baseball victory over Jamestown High School. In 1906, Hugh won 10 games, struck out 160 batters, and did not lose the entire year.
For Falconer High School back probably around 1909, it was probably about 3 years before he pitched for the Boston Red Sox in the World Series, and he got quite a lot of fame because in a 21-inning game against Corey High School, he struck out 42 batters.
My God. Needless to say, the 42 strikeouts in 1908 caught the attention of an awful lot of baseball scouts. It is interesting to note that the record is believed to be an all-time record. Longtime sports editor Frank Hyde researched and came to the conclusion that this has never been exceeded, period. He also wanted to set aside a couple of misconceptions regarding the game. One of the misconceptions is that it was a high school game, and the other misconception is after the 23 innings, Bedient lost. In fact, it was a semi-pro game in Corey, and Hugh did not lose. As it turned out, the game was concluded on a bad infield throw, which allowed 2 runs across in the top of the 23rd inning, with the final score resulting in 3-1 in favor of Hugh Bedient's team. The feat made the wire service, and offers poured in, 19 of them in all, from professional baseball clubs from Maine to California. The result was that Hugh accepted an offer from Falls River, Massachusetts, of the New England League. Thereafter, he was called by the Boston Red Sox under the old free draft laws and reported to Florida in the spring training in 1911. As it turned out, there was a 55-man roster, and it was hard to crack, and Hugh was soon on his way to Providence of the International League, without a chance to show his stuff to the Major League moguls in Florida. In Providence, he had the top win record of the entire staff. As indicated, he went to Boston in 1912 after Providence had sold him to Jersey City for $750, And Jersey City, in turn, sold him to the Red Sox for $5,000. A nice profit for the benefit of Jersey City. In 1912, he showed up in Boston in the beginning of a highly historic year. Hugh made the 1912 Red Sox team and was part of their opening day picture at Fenway Park. Hugh is seen in the center here, and on his left, with his hat off, is Hall of Famer Harry Hooper. Among the other superstars on the Red Sox during that year was Tris Speaker waving his hat on the far right of this picture. 1912 was an historic season. Walter Johnson of the Washington Senators set a record with 16 consecutive victories, and Ty Cobb of Detroit repeated as American League batting champion with a .410 average. Shoeless Joe Jackson hit .398, and Cy Young, the greatest pitcher of all time, retired after 22 years in baseball. However, for local fans, the big news was Hugh Bedient. For in 1912, as a rookie in the American League, Hugh Bedient had the second best percentage on the Boston Red Sox with a 20-10 record. However, the big news was yet to come, for the Boston Red Sox were going to play Johnny McGraw's New York Giants in the World Series.
Win a World Series. Then, in 1912, after dominating the league throughout the season, they faced one of the greatest of all Boston Red Sox teams in the World Series. The Red Sox had won 105 games, an American League record, and their intimidating lineup included Harry Hooper, Tris Speaker, and a dazzling fastball pitcher named Smokey Joe Wood. The 1912 World Series was a fiercely fought contest, on and off the field. Fans followed the action by telegraph and on scoreboards mounted in saloons and city squares all across the country.
This time, a complete play-by-play came over the ticker, and the management had me stand on a platform and read the tape in a loud voice.
No individual, whether player, manager, owner, critic, or spectator, who went through the 1912 World Series will ever forget it. There never was another like it. From the lofty perch of the bleacherite, it was a series crammed with thrills and gulps, cheers and gasps, dejection and wild exultation, recrimination and adoration, excuse and condemnation. Spalding died.
After 7 decades of baseball, and as one of the foremost sports writers, wrote a book entitled Baseball as I Have Known It. He refers to the 1912 World Series as one of the greatest ever. The 1912 World Series, according to the Baseball Encyclopedia, was won by the Boston Red Sox 4-3 with 1 tie. It also shows that our Falconer hero, Hugh Bedient, pitched in 4 of those 8 games, won 1, lost none, and had an ERA of .50, the best on the entire Boston Red Sox staff, which included the likes of Smokey Joe Wood. But that is only part of the story. Hugh came in relief in the second game, an unusual game which was ultimately stopped by darkness with a game tied 6-6. He also came in relief in the third game, which was won by the Giants 2-1. Boston won the fourth game to take a lead of 2-1 with one tied. Fred Lieb, in his book, recalled the writer's feeling prior to the fifth game. It was felt by most of us writers that the fifth game played in Boston on October 12th would be the deciding game of the series. Christy Mathewson, one of the all-time great pitchers, was to start for the Giants, and his opponent was a young right-hander from Falconer, New York, Hugh Bedient, who in his boyhood days had been a Mathewson hero worshiper. It now was his job to down the mighty Matty. Hence the backdrop for the fifth game of the 1912 World Series.
Into the majors, but his greatest fame was in the, I think it was the fifth game of the 1912 World Series. He pitched against Christy Mathewson, who was one of the all-time greats, and I think Hugh was 23 at the time he pitched that game. And in that game, he allowed 3 hits and Mathewson 5. And I think the score was 2-1, Boston. But a lot of people remember that game time. It was Jamestown Post, or no, it was a Journal. And back in those days, you know, no radio or anything. They used to have the play-by-play in the newspaper when it came out. And the paper went to press probably 3:30 or 4. I can remember my dad used to have these papers up in the attic. And some collectors got this by mistake one day. My sisters allowed them to come there, they took it. And I had this newspaper, the World Series of 1912 that Hugh pitched. It was like inning 1, so-and-so grounded out, second to first, and so on. And then it went on about the 6th inning. That's when he went to press. And he retired him in order. I can quote you verbatim. It says, Bedient burned the ball over the plate with bewildering speed, and his curve drop was working nicely. It was just a little note at the end of the 6th inning. And that paper, if I had it today, it would be worth...
When the smoke had settled, youthful Hugh Bedient had beat the seasoned and awesome Christy Mathewson 2-1 to write his shining chapter in the archives of World Series play. Fog hung low that day, and the game started under a threat of rain, ideal conditions for Bedient's blinding speed. The final line score indicated that Hugh Bedient had limited the National League team to just 3 hits. In fact, he would have had a shutout, but for an error by Larry Gardner permitting Fred Merkle to score the Giants' lone run in the 7th inning.
About the game against Mathewson, he said that the day was just made for him. He said it was a dark day, and his fastball was just popping in there. He said I don't think I threw over a half a dozen curveballs all day. He says because it was just dark and it was just a little bit hard for him to see his fastball, and so that's what made the game for him.
Yeah.
After the victory, it looked like the Boston Red Sox would coast to its World Championship. However, the next 2 games fell into the hands of the New York Giants by the scores of 5-2 and 11-4, including a victory over 32-game winner Smokey Joe Wood. This set the showdown for the 8th and final game of the World Series.
That game, but they don't remember the fact that the series was tied at, I think it was tied at 4 games apiece. They used to play 9 games at that time. And Hugh and Christy Mathewson were met again in that final game.
With John McGraw naturally calling on his #1 man, Christy Mathewson, and Jake Stahl going with Hugh Bedient, the 2-1 winner over Mathewson in the 5th game. As Fred Lieb described it, both men, the veteran and the youngster, pitched beautiful baseball. Matty went ahead 1-0 in the 3rd inning. The Red Sox tied it in the 7th when Jake Stahl hit a pop fly double to short left field. With 2 out, Olaf Hendrickson, a pinch hitter for Hugh Bedient, tied the game with a hard line drive which smacked the first base bag and was deflected into foul territory. for a 2-base hit. Hugh left the game in the 7th, having battled the great Christy Mathewson and permitting the Boston Red Sox to go into its late inning dramatics, which is still being talked about in the World Series annals.
Right in the pages of World Series baseball history, the name of Snodgrass. Write it large and black. Not as a hero, truly not. Put him rather with Merkel, who was in such a hurry that he gave away a National League championship. Snodgrass was in such a hurry that he gave away a world championship. New York Times.
Boston tied it up in the 7th, but a single by Fred Merkel drove home New York's go-ahead run in the 10th. Now, all Mathewson had to do was hold Boston for one more inning, and the Giants could take the championship home to New York. The first man up for Boston was a pinch hitter, Clyde Engel. He hit a great, big, lazy, high fly ball, recalled Giant center fielder Fred Snodgrass. It looked like an easy out. Snodgrass and the left fielder both moved toward the ball. Snodgrass called for it. I yelled and waved him off, he remembered. And then, well, I dropped the darn thing. Engel ended up on second. Snodgrass put out the very next batter, Harry Hooper, with a spectacular catch. But it was his muff that fans would remember. Mathewson walked the next Boston batter. Tris Speaker drove Engel home to tie the game, and Larry Gardner followed with a sacrifice fly that drove in the winning run. Boston had won it 3-2. It had taken them 8 games to get there, but the Boston Red Sox were the world champions.
For over half a century, I've had to live with the fact that I dropped a ball in a World Series. Oh, yes, you're the guy that dropped that fly ball, aren't you? But for years and years, whenever I'd be introduced to somebody, they'd start saying something and then stop, you know. Afraid of hurting my feelings.
And the Boston Red Sox were the world champions, having beaten the New York Giants 3-2 in the 8th game. Hugh Bedient had started against Christy Mathewson on that 8th game, and for 7 innings they waged a carbon copy of their great 5th game duel, which was won by Hugh Bedient 2-1. As history will note, Bedient was lifted in the 8th with the score tied 1-1. It's also worth noting that 1912 was the first year of Fenway Park. 50 years later, Hugh Bedient would join 7 other members of the World Championship team for a reunion, being their golden anniversary of not only Fenway Park, but the first championship of Boston at Fenway Park. Here we see Hugh, second in from the right, next to Hall of Famer Harry Hooper. After the usual victory fanfare in Boston, Hugh and his wife hurried home to Levant, a short throw from Falconer, and their arrival on the late afternoon train touched off a series of noisy demonstrations which culminated in a major parade seen by 25,000 local fans. This was big, big news. Local boy had defeated Christy Mathewson. This is a picture of the crowd as it arrived to celebrate its hometown hero on October 22nd, 1912, on the corner of 3rd and Main Street in Jamestown.
Quite a few years back, that game with Christy Mathewson in the World Series was listed as one of the 10 greatest pitching duels in World Series history. Probably still is.
25,000 is probably the largest crowd that any happening has demanded in our community. That's overwhelming. That's outstanding.
Sure is.
And that's half the city's population, right now.
I have the original picture of that.
Oh, do you really?
Yeah, and but it shows more of it. It shows the buildings on the corner of Main and Third, and there's across where Clark's drugstore was. I think it was a 3 or 4 story building.
Did he get off the train in Falconer or Jamestown, you remember?
Falconer, I believe.
That's
Yeah.
the time.
And there were people sitting in every window in this 3 or 4 story building. Maybe 3 people sitting in each window, you know, besides the shoulder-to-shoulder crowd in the street.
That's probably more than the end of the war celebration, I'm sure.
Activities concluded with a program, and the banquet conclusion was summed up as follows. Hugh Bedient pitched 18 innings for the Boston Red Sox against the New York Giants. He allowed New York only 10 hits and 2 runs. At the most critical time in the series, he unexpectedly became the main reliance of the team, and with great strength and skill and unfaltering courage, he carried them on to victory. About to be one of the great nights in sports as well as local history. Thank you, Hugh Bedient, for the memories.
Nine of the surviving members of the 1912 team there, and to me it was a joy just to sit back and watch them get reacquainted and that sort of thing. And some of the funny things that happened when I took him back, you know, the Red Sox picked up the tab for everything for the 9 players and whoever their traveling companions were. And we got there on Friday evening, well, late Friday afternoon actually. And so we went down to the dining room that night, and I asked the waiter, I said, "Are any of the other old timers here yet?" He says, "Oh yeah." He said, "That table over there, those are all the old timers." And Hugh was sitting there, it was about as far as from here to Greg. And Hugh was looking, he says, "That's not them." I said, "Hugh, the waiter should know." He said, "No, that's not, I don't recognize any of them." I said, "Of course you don't, you know." So finally I convinced him to get up and go over. So all you can do is go over and ask him. And so he got up real like a half-scared kid, and he went over, and I saw him say something to one guy, and they all jumped up, you know, and to greet him and shake hands. And he sat down. I just sat back at the table all alone and watched it and enjoyed every minute of it, you know. But then, you know, Hugh was not a drinker. He very seldom would ever take a drink. Another funny thing that happened that night, before he went over to meet these people, the waiter came and asked if we'd like a drink before dinner, and I said, "Well, yeah, I think probably we would." I said, "What do you want, Hugh?" And he said, "I don't know." I said, "You want a Manhattan?" He said, "Yeah, I'll have one of those." And I said, "Would you rather have a martini?" "Yeah, I'll have one of those." "Or maybe just have a beer." "Hugh, yeah, I'll have one of those." And so I told the waiter, I said, "Just bring him the mildest drink you can bring him." And then this went on, and we had a wonderful 3 days, or two days. We had that get-together that night, and then, which pleased me, is that each day I had breakfast, lunch, and dinner with these 9 guys, you know. Smokey Joe Wood, and I remember him particularly. He was a great guy. And kids come in for autographs. Smokey wouldn't leave till he'd given the last autograph. And we just enjoyed it. And then, of course, I knew Ray Collins, the left-hand pitcher for them. I knew Ray and his wife long before this, because they used to come up and visit the Bedients. And so the next day, Saturday, they had the big game against Detroit. And, of course, all of us invited guests had real good seats, and I went to everything with Mrs. Collins. She kind of took me under her wing, and we were together most of the time. And then they had a banquet that night, big banquet, with all of the coaches and officials of both teams and these celebrities, and enjoyed that very much. You know, just sitting back and basking in reflected glory, I guess you'd say. You know, but Hugh, as I say, was very modest. And one thing I remember, you might wonder some of his thrills. I asked him one time what maybe was a big thrill for him, and he said probably one of the biggest thrills was when he was in the minor leagues, AAA or whatever, and Mickey Cochran was catching, and he was known as the big Batman, you know, and he said that it was a close game toward the end of the game, and they walked Mickey Cochran to get to Hugh. And Hugh hit a home run. He said that was probably one of his biggest thrills. But like I say, you had to drag it out of him to get
Did
him.
you ever talk about the game in Corey?
Very little, very little. He talked about the game against Matheson. He said that the day was just made for him. He said it was a dark day, and his fastball was just popping in there. He said I don't think I threw over a half a dozen curveballs all day. He says because it was just dark and it was just a little bit hard for him to see his fastball, and so that's what made the game for him.
Yeah. You talk about the last game, the 8th game at all? And they talk about pressure. Going to turn on the lights here.
No, not really. He didn't. Not that I discussed with him.
The Federal League, I mean, he had, in many senses, he was one of a renegade.
Yeah, yeah.
Having gone from the established league into the Federal League, and there was a lot of controversy at the time. He kind of put his career at risk.
Yeah, that's right. I spent so many years that I was with him that I'd forgotten half of what he was telling me. I wish I had remembered more of it. But I do have all of his scrapbooks and all this memento. In fact, this is what they got when they won the World Series. Instead of nowadays they get these big rings and everything, they get this little pin and it says World Champions 1912. And it was a diamond in the center of this. And all this is a lapel pin. Well, when Hugh died, I had been married to his daughter 29 years at the time, and when he died on our anniversary, my wife gave me this ring. And that's the diamond that was in there. And he and I were very close. I mean, as close as father and son. In fact, I think he looked upon me as a replacement of his son that he lost. In fact, I started dating his daughter a month before his son was killed in 1940. And married her in 1944, so Hugh was my father-in-law for 21 years. And a real gentleman.
He wasn't pitching any of the exhibition games then, or any of the semi-pro at that time, was he? He would have been pretty old, I guess.
Yeah.
You never saw him pitch?
No, only I saw him pitch like Bob says, in batting practice down at the Falconer Park or something like this.
Now, his son, was there Hugh Jr.?
Yes. Well, not Hugh Jr., but Hugh Palmer Bedient.
Okay.
Hugh was Hugh Carpenter Bedient. But his son Hugh, he went by the name of Palmer, and he was a good pitcher in his own right, and had a good record. But Hugh had Connie Mack look over his son, watch him pitch, and Connie Mack said that he didn't have good enough fastball to make the majors.
Was there any, did he ever talk about, was there pressure on the kid when you think about here's the son of a local legend, a pitcher in the same position?
No, he never talked about the pressure of it all, but of course he had great support for his son, and his son was a little more hot-headed than Hugh. And remember, Hugh would try to control him as far as his temper on the baseball field was concerned.
And you, curious, do you still get letters for folks looking for memorabilia of Hugh Bedient?
Haven't in the last few years. No, it's been a few years since I got him, but I've run out of signatures now. I kept all his old checks and things, you know, and would cut the signatures off and send them to people, but it's been several years now.
I didn't know that, Russ. Russ, you and I didn't know this. We would have been right down there.
That's right.
A long time ago. For that autograph you saw out there, occasionally in the autograph market, you know, I would buy these when Hugh Bedient comes up there.
Yeah. Well, getting back to this pin, you see the size of this thing, and then what they get today. I played golf last year with a linebacker for the Dallas Cowboys who had 2 Super Bowl rings, and the day I played with him, he had on one of these rings. And the ring itself was probably 2 times as big as this, and I asked him how much those rings cost. He said $14,000 a piece. A little bit of difference between, of course, the difference in salaries too, you know.
What kind of money did you get to win that World Series? Did he ever say that?
His contract, they showed it on the screen, it was $3,000 a year.
But I mean, for winning the World Series, did they have?
Oh, I never knew what his purse was.
Probably didn't get a cut in those days.
Yeah. I know they offered him a bonus if he wouldn't get married that fall. But he did anyway, he got married. And Ray Collins, excuse me, just a minute, Ray Collins, the left-handed pitcher, and his wife stood up with Hugh and his wife when they got married.
I have a question. I worked with Swat Erickson down at the Argonne, the warehouse, and he used to talk about, now correct me, this was quite a while ago, but correct me if I'm wrong, that he and Hugh Bedient hooked up together at Falconer on different exhibition games as pitchers. Were they?
I believe they have, yeah.
They did. Because when I was just a little kid in diapers, I used to go up to Ralph and Warren's Mays farm.
Oh, yeah.
We used to spend a lot of time up there. Yeah. And they used to come down to the ball games. And I used to get in the back of the car and come down with them and watch the ball games there. And I can vaguely remember some of the good ball games they had down there.
Yeah.
And I just wondered if I'm on the right course here.
Yeah. Swat and Hugh were good friends. They'd go back and forth, the families.
I think they both pitched with the Spiders together.
Yeah, I believe
other
they did.
pitchers named Nate Dreyer and Tony Spetz and Harold Sweet. They played with the Spiders up in the Delaware Park.
I used to deliver milk to Nate Dreyer's place up there on the corner of Price Street, you know, and we'd get hooked up once in a while in a little baseball schedule, and I'd get way behind on my deliveries.
25,000 is probably the largest crowd that any happening has demanded in our community. That's overwhelming. That's outstanding.
Sure is.
And that's half the city's population, right?
I have the original picture of that.
Do you really?
Yeah, and but it shows more of it. It shows the buildings on the corner of Main and Third, and there's across where Clark's drugstore was. I think it was a 3 or 4 story building.
Did he get off the train in Falconer or Jamestown, you remember?
Falconer, I believe. Yeah. And there were people sitting in every window in this 3 or 4 story building. Maybe 3 people sitting in each window, you know, besides the shoulder-to-shoulder crowd in the street. He had one sister, and he had 3 children. Well, they had a 4th one, a boy that died at birth, but the son that lived and was a baseball player himself. Later went into the Air Force just before World War II and was killed in a plane crash over New York City, in 1940, just prior to the war.
In a military plane?
Yeah, he was a pilot, a bomber pilot, and
Were they in formation?
they were in formation, and a couple of planes locked wings up there in formation over, I guess it was over Long Island, and he was killed. At one time, a few years back, quite a few years back, that game with Christy Mathewson in the World Series was listed as one of the 10 greatest pitching duels in World Series history. Probably still is. I don't know.
Did he have much in the form of, or do you have much stuff in the form of memorabilia of Hughes left? Jackets, gloves?
I had his glove years ago, and I wish I still had. I don't know what happened to it.
Probably went out in the fire sale with everything else.
Boy,
Everybody's baseball cards.
the thing, I wouldn't have worn it when I was in grade school. It was so beat up. Just a couple of pieces of leather stuck together.
Slightly smaller than the gloves they have today.
Oh, yeah, much smaller, and no padding, you know?
Now, construction of the new ballpark Fenway began in 1911 when the Taylors announced they would have the finest ballpark in the country. And then it talks about, but in late December 1911, there came an unexpected announcement that the Taylors had sold 50% of the club to John McAller, capital MC, capital A-L-L-E-R, manager of the Washington Club, and Robert B. McRoy, Van Johnson's right-hand active control man. Does his burial site recognize his baseball career?
No, he's buried down Levant Cemetery.
There's no marking of...
Nothing regarding baseball, no.
Tell them that story about when they were traveling around on the train, the exhibition, and with Ruth and Thorpe and Garrett was with them.
Well, I don't recall Ruth and Thorpe and when they travel on these Pullmans, you know, Jim Thorpe was a wild man anyway, I guess, and Hugh used to say that they'd try to get some sleep, and Thorpe would come and start throwing guys out of the berths. He says, when Thorpe's awake, everybody's awake.
Now, would this be, would they have been traveling, I mean, both, Thorpe was on the Giants. This would have been part of their World Series, have been traveling together?
I don't know what the situation was. He just tells the story of the,
Mom said it was like some exhibition thing.
was it? Yeah. Too bad.
It was in the off-season.
Too bad my sister-in-law isn't well and could. She has a mind like a newspaper. She knows all of these facts. You know. Scrapbook. The only thing I see is for advertising is that there was a picture of him advertising some shoe.
Wow.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Hugh was advertising?
Yeah.
Oh, no
The
kidding.
shoe
He
company. The
endorsed
shoe
it, huh?
company endorsement. Yeah. The shoe company had an ad in there with showing Hugh and
Interesting.
he wears these shoes.
Oh, good.
He would shy away from the limelight.
Yeah. Did you ever have nights down at the college stadium? Do you remember anything, Hugh Bedient night or anything like that?
No, I remember one night they had a Hall of Fame night or something down there, and this was just a month before Hugh died. He was in real bad shape at the time, and they invited him, wanted him to come to this doings, you know. And Wes Paplow, the old police chief from Falconer, was a real good friend of Hugh's too. So Wes and I took him up there, and they allowed me to drive in the stadium right up to the stairway going into the grandstand. And then Wes Paplow helped me, and we walked Hugh up to his seat, and they introduced him from the grandstand rather than from out on the field. I remember he was so weak at the time I had to stand up and pull him up onto his feet so he could be recognized. And he could only sit there for maybe 2 innings, and he was so skinny at this point in time that so we took him back, put him in the car, and took him for a ride. And it was his last ride.
Yeah. Did he follow baseball?
Not,
Listen on the radio? Television?
no, not too closely, but his wife did.
Yeah.
His wife was knew everything that was going on in the baseball. She could tell you who was with who and who they were traded to and what religion they were and everything else. I mean, everybody, every team, she knew them all. And she was hard of hearing. And she lived about a block and a half from my wife and I. And so I'd go to walk over to the house, and I'd get halfway there, and I could hear her radio in the summertime when the doors were up, halfway to her house. I guess the neighbors all knew she was a baseball fan.
That was even before boom boxes.
Yeah, it was. She had a boom box out there. Yeah.
Frank Hyde had preserved a lot of that stuff that you know about 1912. The rest of the stuff after 1912, it gets kind of misty, and you don't know the Federal League, you don't know what happened in the Toledo's and things like that, and obviously Frank had sat down with Hugh and preserved that.
Yeah.
Because that part gets lost. You really would know that the guy pitched really one very wonderful year in 1912. Well, the truth of the matter is the guy pitched until 1925.
Yeah. Yeah.
In the high minors. The major leagues for a few years and the high minors. And there's very few of us who even know people who pitched in the high minors, and he did it for a long period of time. That's magnificent. You got to be good to continue to do that. Even with sore arm and all.
Yeah.